The briefing room fell silent as Lieutenant Marcus Reynolds glanced at the new pilot's file, then looked up with barely concealed skepticism. Sarah Chen, 24 years old, 5'4", he muttered under his breath to his wingman. Command seriously thinks she can handle a multi-million-dollar FA-18 Super Hornet? What he didn't know was that Sarah had been listening from the doorway, her hand instinctively moving to the worn leather folder she carried everywhere, the one containing a certificate that would change everything he thought he knew about aerial combat excellence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Naval Air Station Oceana as Sarah Chen stepped out of the transport vehicle, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a worn leather folder clutched tightly in her other hand. The roar of FA-18 Super Hornets conducting training exercises filled the air, a sound that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. But today felt different. Today, she was starting fresh at a new squadron where nobody knew her story, where she would have to prove herself all over again. The salty Virginia air carried the scent of jet fuel and possibility, but also the weight of unspoken challenges that lay ahead. As Sarah made her way toward the squadron headquarters, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances from ground crew and pilots alike. At 5'4" with a slight frame, she stood out among the typically towering figures of naval aviators. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her flight suit bore only the basic insignia of her rank and qualifications, nothing that would hint at the extraordinary achievements hidden within that leather folder. She had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let her actions speak louder than her credentials, especially in environments where first impressions could make or break key careers. The briefing room buzzed with the typical pre-flight chatter when Sarah entered, but conversations gradually died down as heads turned in her direction. Lieutenant Marcus Reynolds, a seasoned pilot with over 8 years of combat experience, was reviewing flight schedules with his wingman when he noticed the newcomer. His eyes immediately went to her personnel file on the desk, scanning the basic information with the practiced efficiency of someone who had sized up countless pilots over the years. Sarah Chen, 24 years old, 5'4", he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for his colleague to hear. Command seriously thinks she can handle a multi-million-dollar FA-18 Super Hornet? What Lieutenant Reynolds didn't realize was that Sarah had paused just outside the doorway, her keen hearing picking up every word of his assessment. Her grip tightened on the leather folder, feeling the outline of the document inside that could instantly change his perspective. But she had made a decision long ago to earn respect through demonstration rather than declaration. Too many times she had seen pilots coast on their reputations rather than their current abilities. She wanted to be different. She wanted to be better. The squadron commander, Captain Mitchell Harrison, called the room to attention as he began the morning briefing. Sarah took a seat in the back, observing the dynamics of her new team while Captain Harrison outlined the day's training objectives. The mission was complex, aerial combat maneuvering exercises designed to test split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. As he assigned flight pairs, Sarah noticed the subtle exchanges of glances when her name was called. She was paired with Lieutenant Reynolds himself, a decision that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including Reynolds. After the briefing, as pilots dispersed to conduct pre-flight preparations, Lieutenant Reynolds approached Sarah with what could generously be described as professional courtesy. "Chen, right?" he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone doing their duty rather than expressing genuine interest. "This is going to be an aggressive training exercise. The FA-18 isn't forgiving of mistakes, and we'll be pulling some serious G's out there. You sure you're ready for this level of intensity?" His question hung in the air like a challenge, though Sarah suspected he intended it as genuine concern mixed with barely concealed doubt about her capabilities. Sarah met his gaze directly, her voice steady and confident without betraying any of the frustration she felt at being prejudged. "I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant Reynolds, but I assure you, I'm prepared for whatever today's mission requires." She paused, allowing a small smile to cross her lips. "I've been pulling G's since before some of these pilots knew what a flight stick was." Her response was measured but carried an undertone that hinted at depths of experience that her youthful appearance might not immediately suggest. As they walked toward the flight line where the Super Hornets awaited, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The leather folder in her hand contained more than just another pilot's credentials. It represented years of sacrifice, dedication, and achievement at the highest levels of naval aviation. But she had learned that respect earned through action lasted longer than respect granted through reputation. Today would be another opportunity to prove that excellence in the cockpit had nothing to do with height, age, or gender, and everything to do with skill, determination, and the ability to make life or death decisions at 30,000 feet. The pre-flight inspection revealed Sarah's meticulous attention to detail as she methodically checked every system on her FA-18 Super Hornet. Lieutenant Reynolds watched from his adjacent aircraft, expecting to see the nervous energy typical of pilots facing their first challenging assignment with a new squadron. Instead, he observed movements that spoke of countless hours of experience. The way she tested control surfaces, checked weapon systems, and verified navigation equipment with the confidence of someone who had done this routine thousands of times before. There was something almost ritualistic about her preparation, each step executed with a precision that began to plant seeds of doubt about his initial assessment. The tower cleared both aircraft for takeoff, and Sarah's Super Hornet lifted off the runway with textbook perfection. As they climbed to the designated training altitude, Lieutenant Reynolds found himself surprised by her radio communications. Crisp, professional, and using tactical terminology with the ease of a veteran pilot. When they reached the combat training area, the exercise began in earnest. What Reynolds expected to be a teaching moment quickly transformed into something entirely different. Sarah's aircraft moved through the sky with an elegance that defied explanation, executing barrel rolls and split-S maneuvers that pushed the boundaries of what he thought possible for someone of her apparent experience level. The simulated dogfight intensified as Sarah demonstrated aerial combat techniques that Reynolds had only seen performed by the most elite pilots in the Navy. Her ability to maintain situational awareness while executing complex defensive maneuvers was nothing short of extraordinary. She seemed to anticipate his moves before he made them, positioning her aircraft with mathematical precision that turned defense into offense in the span of seconds. When she executed a textbook Pugachev's Cobra, a maneuver so advanced that most pilots never attempted it outside of demonstration flights, Reynolds realized he was not flying against an ordinary naval aviator. Back on the ground after the exercise, a crowd of pilots and ground crew had gathered around the aircraft. Word had spread quickly about the newcomer's performance, and everyone wanted to see the pilot who had just outmaneuvered one of the squadron's most experienced officers. Lieutenant Reynolds climbed down from his cockpit, his face a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and grudging admiration. As he approached Sarah, who was completing her post-flight checklist with the same meticulous attention she had shown before takeoff, he struggled to find words that would acknowledge what had just transpired without completely undermining his earlier skepticism. "Chen," he began, his voice carrying a different tone than it had that morning. "That was some impressive flying up there. Those maneuvers. Where did you learn to fly like that?" The question was genuine now, stripped of the condescension that had colored their earlier interaction. Sarah looked up from her checklist, then reached into her flight suit to retrieve the worn leather folder she had carried since arriving at the base. The same folder that had been her constant companion through every assignment, every challenge, every moment when she had been underestimated because of her appearance. With deliberate care, Sarah opened the folder and withdrew a document that made Lieutenant Reynolds' eyes widen in disbelief. The certificate bore the official seal of the Navy's elite fighter weapons school, known throughout the military world by its legendary call sign, Top Gun. But this wasn't just any Top Gun certificate. It was recognition as the program's distinguished graduate, an honor reserved for the single best pilot in each class. The document showed that Sarah had not only completed the most challenging flight training program in the world, but had done so with scores that placed her among the top 1% of all naval aviators in history. The silence that followed was profound as other pilots gathered around to see the certificate that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about their new squadron mate. Lieutenant Reynolds stared at the document, then looked up at Sarah with an expression of genuine respect mixed with deep embarrassment about his earlier assumptions. "Top Gun distinguished graduate," he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of recognition for an achievement that represented the pinnacle of naval aviation excellence. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant Chen. I made judgments based on everything except what actually matters in a cockpit. Sarah carefully returned the certificate to its protective folder, her demeanor remaining professional despite the vindication she must have felt. "We all make assumptions, Lieutenant Reynolds," she replied with a grace that made his earlier skepticism seem even more misplaced. "What matters is what we do when we learn we were wrong." The gathering crowd began to disperse, but the dynamic within the squadron had shifted permanently. Sarah had not just proven her competence, she had revealed herself to be among the elite of the elite, a pilot whose skills had been forged in the crucible of the world's most demanding training program. As the sun set over Naval Air Station Oceana that evening, Lieutenant Reynolds found himself reflecting on the day's events and the valuable lesson he had learned about the danger of first impressions. Sarah Chen had arrived carrying credentials that most pilots could only dream of achieving, but she had chosen to let her flying do the talking rather than her reputation. In a world where excellence was often proclaimed rather than proven, she had demonstrated the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that true skill reveals itself when it matters most. The story of Lieutenant Sarah Chen and her Top Gun certificate serves as a powerful reminder that excellence in military service comes in many forms, often hidden behind assumptions and first impressions that fail to capture the full measure of a person's capabilities. In squadrons across the world, men and women serve with distinction, carrying stories of achievement and sacrifice that might not be immediately visible but become apparent when duty calls for their very best. Every day, our military heroes prove that strength, skill, and dedication cannot be measured by appearance alone. They carry within themselves the training, experience, and commitment necessary to defend freedom and protect those who cannot protect themselves. Their stories deserve to be told, their achievements recognized, and their service honored. If you found inspiration in Sarah's story of quiet excellence and hard-earned respect, please subscribe to our channel for more stories celebrating the remarkable men and women who serve in our armed forces. Share this video with others who appreciate tales of military heroism, and let us know in the comments about the veterans and active service members in your life whose hidden achievements deserve recognition. Together, we can ensure that their stories of courage, skill, and dedication continue to inspire future generations of Americans who answer the call to serve.